Joining us right now via Zoom chat is Robert Kraychik. He is with Breitbart News, and we're here to discuss what is going on in Canada. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Hey, good morning, Joe. It's great to be with you.
You know, Canada is one of these stories where I think I'm speaking for myself here, tempted to just look at the headlines and sort of interpret that on the surface. And yet sometimes I'm reminded that there could be circumstances or situations that might have a little bit more complexity. And so we want to sort out fact from fiction. And especially with Trudeau's extending the Emergency Powers Act and seemingly making some of it even permanent, according to Canadian Finance Minister. So what is going on? What is the status of the protest up there, the status of the Emergency Powers Act? Robert Kraychik, what say you?
Okay, Joe, let's get to that in just a moment. Would you indulge me for a moment? There's some observations I want to share with you that I made during my attendance at these demonstrations that I think will be of deep interest to you and your audience. And it deals with what I observed regarding a sort of religious conviction among a decent cohort of the demonstrators. Would that be okay?
Please do.
Okay, so I spent easily over 100 hours at this demonstration across the past few weeks. I'm born and raised in Ottawa. I've lived basically my whole life here. And I got to speak with so many people, dozens, over 100 people for sure, deep conversations about why they were there, what their motivations were. I'm obsessed with politics. So of course, I was asking them about first principles, their moral frameworks, their philosophies. And what I observed among a good cohort of them is that there is a Christian ethos, a sort of religious framework that at least forms part of their rationale and the motivation for attendance and their opposition to what they view as this growing, centralized, oppressive system. And it was so amazing to behold. It was great to see that. I encountered terms like fellowship. I met people of great conviction who saw things with moral clarity. Not that there isn't nuance in life, as you were mentioning a moment ago, but there are some things that are right and there are some things that are wrong. And I also got to see impromptu prayer sessions.
Wow.
And it's an undeniable element of this demonstration, this religious Christian foundation and conviction. I just wanted to share that with you because I thought that would be of deep interest to you and your audience.
Let me ask a follow-up question then to that, on that note. You know, one of the things was describing the protesters as terrorists, as Nazis, as white supremacists. I mean, we watched some of these videos coming out of the parliament up there, and you're like, are they seeing the same things? I saw bouncy houses and smiling children and whatever. So maybe you can clarify that. You spent some time on the ground. What was the nature, besides prayer rallies there? What else was going on there? Were there any signs of white supremacist activity or violence or anything like that on behalf of the protests themselves?
No, that narrative is not even 1% true. It is literally the opposite of the truth. I met people of all sorts of backgrounds, ethnic, racial, national origins, more importantly, different geographical locations and professional backgrounds, different lines of work, different ages. And everyone was unified in opposition to, again, this increasingly oppressive apparatus of control and surveillance that's being marketed to us as a public health and public safety measure. So this white supremacy, I don't even accept the premise that that's even a thing to begin with.
Yeah, man.
I saw people together of all sorts of backgrounds. It was amazing. In terms of violence, no, it was the opposite. This is a family-friendly protest. I've never seen anything like it. And to just relate a bit to what I was saying before about this religious element to a decent cohort of people who were attending. Look, I'm not very religious. I'm sort of a secular, corporeal guy. And it felt metaphysical. There's a spiritual aspect to it. There's a sort of transcendent dimension to this unification of all sorts of people coming together in unity in opposition to something that they view as clearly wicked, clearly immoral, clearly unlawful.
Yes, Mr. Kraychik, I agree with you. It seems to me that when big things like this happen, like, for example, in Ottawa or anywhere here in the United States, the media tends to demonize the participants of the protest as, a white supremacist, or they levy all of the big hot button issues and force them on the people there. But I'm wondering if you could speak about what remains of the protest in Ottawa and in Canada in general.
Okay, so in Ottawa, the actual physical demonstration in downtown with a lot of these truckers being parked on certain streets and partially, that's a key word, partially obstructing traffic. It wasn't, actually, I wouldn't even say obstructing traffic, increasing traffic, because they never blocked off any lanes. It's very important to know that. There was no suffocation or strangulation, as you may be led to believe if you read headlines from so-called mainstream media. There was no siege. There was no occupation. These terms are hysterical and absurd, and you should never take them seriously. What remains of the demonstration is very little physically. That said, the people who were demonstrating did not disappear. They still exist. They have coordinated with one another. I think there's some concentration of trucks somewhere away from the downtown core. I can't remember exactly where. And in terms of what's coming, we're seeing demonstrations grow in other large Canadian cities. So even though there is a sort of end to the physical side of what we saw here in Ottawa, this is far from over.
Yeah, Trudeau said yesterday that they were blocking and sieging downtown. And that was part of his speech in deciding to extend the Emergency Powers Act. So we're seeing a definite misrepresentation of protesters themselves. But we're also seeing, we saw incredible video of abuse on the hands of police. So tell us about that part. We have a couple of minutes before we have to go to a quick break. But when it comes to like the aggressive behavior of police against the protesters, what's fact, what's fiction in that? You got about 2 minutes.
Well, I was there for a long time. I would say the majority of police were conducting themselves professionally, at least within the context of what they're doing, which is putting down a peaceful demonstration. But I did see violence. I did see aggression. The videos speak for themselves, and those who are interested can go online and see them. They were too ubiquitous. They were too widely shared to be put down in this whack-a-mole style that we usually see from big technology companies in terms of their censorship. So don't take my word for it. Go see it for yourself. There were abuses. There was, in my view, excess force use. Again, I'm not some sort of professional, I'm not a police officer. I'm just a citizen. But I saw violence in some instances, both personally and online afterwards, that, in my view, cannot be justified given what was taking place.
There was a story out today about conversations going on behind the scenes in some chat by police officers, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and one of them actually said, quote, time for protesters to hear our jackboots on the ground, close quote, and sort of bragging and joking behind the scenes about getting in there and roughing up some of these protesters. So that's of grave concern, wouldn't you say?
I would say so. I would hope that that is not representative of broader law enforcement. And I'll just share a hot take with you. If you share my view that we're sort of degrading morally in many ways as a society, it shouldn't surprise us to see law enforcement afflicted by that same degradation. They're with us too. They're on this moral decline.
Hold that thought. Robert Kraychik is our guest. Tell us about the Emergency Powers Act. What does this mean? I mean, we're the outsiders looking in here. You're Canadian. What exactly does the Emergency Powers Act mean?
Okay, we'll get to the Emergencies Act in a moment. Just a couple of details you might want to remember here. Chrystia Freeland is also our Deputy Prime Minister, which means she's sort of our Canadian analog to the U.S. Vice President.
I see.
Now, in terms of these financial measures that she's already used and has promised to expand, last I saw, over 200 financial products, which I'm guessing are bank accounts, credit cards, lines of credit, who knows, had been frozen. And that will increase, according to her own promise, based on people who were deemed to be involved in the protest in some way the government was not okay with. Now, those measures are not related to the Emergencies Act. They're independent of that. FinTrack is a series of financial regulations applied to financial institutions to combat ostensibly money laundering and terrorist and criminal financing. So just consider that for a moment. Anti-money laundering laws and regulations to address financing of terrorism and criminal activities are being used to go after people who are financing a peaceful demonstration. So that's alarming. Now, in terms of the Emergencies Act itself, Trudeau invoked that. It was sanctioned by our House of Commons, again, our sort of analog to your House of Representatives, and that allowed for expansion of certain powers. The ones that are most apropos to this situation are the ability of the federal government now to seize certain assets for its own use and disposal, which in this case included the compelling tow companies to remove trucks that were parked downtown, presumably against their will. And
we're hearing rumors that they are impounding the trucks and then looking to auction them off. So, and I imagine that some of these truck drivers probably have a bank loan to pay for these trucks. And if the state auctions them off, they still owe the bank the money, and some new guy is getting to drive their truck around.
Yeah, so there are a myriad of governmental forces at work here to impose punitive measures on the truckers and their supporters. So this auctioning off of trucks and other assets was a threat levied by Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson, who ideologically is sort of like a Muriel Bowser type, very much like his DC analog. And in order to recuperate costs, according to him, related to enforcement measures, he is throwing out this idea of auctioning off these trucks and seizing whatever is recovered from them for the municipal treasury.
That's going to crush financially these protesters even further. As I said, if they own bank loans on that, the bank's not going to forgive them of those loans.
Yeah, and this obviously is an extension of an ongoing financial crushing that we've been seeing for over 2 years with what I describe as the COVID-19 enterprise. So all sorts of people, truckers included, have had their finances harmed by all sorts of restrictions. And again, like I was saying earlier, a lot of measures and decrees and edicts have been imposed from all levels of government. It's sort of a full court press coming from the federal, provincial, and municipal levels.
So yeah, that's very interesting to me, especially in the regards to their banking, because I'm not familiar with Canadian law, but how exactly is Justin Trudeau able to freeze their assets, including things like their cryptocurrency, and then shut down any and all of their fundraisers that are happening side by side? How is this even possible that they have the ability to do that?
Okay, so forgive me for missing some of the details, but the broad strategy here is to use industry to do things that the government is not confident it can do on its own. So I'll just go to the US for one moment. The federal government in the US, as well as its so-called mainstream media, coordinate with big technology companies to engage in censorship. And this allows the federal government in America to circumvent the First Amendment. In Canada, what happened was the federal government asked financial institutions to freeze financial products of persons and companies that it said were supporting an unlawful demonstration, in its own words, this illegal siege, this illegal occupation, again, their language. So it's not that Trudeau himself is doing it. The federal government sort of keeps its hands clean by having banks do its dirty work for it. And I saw headlines just this morning, I didn't look at the details, forgive me, about some measures being taken to absolve banks of potential legal liability for harm caused to people and businesses through imposition of these measures.
That's unbelievable. So what remains of the mandates that people were protesting? I know in Ottawa it seemed that they were going to back off with the mandates. And you see in different provinces, too, that they're backing off, too. I'm wondering what remains of the mandates, and also how do individual provinces decide what they want for their particular area?
Yeah, this is an important point. So we do have varying mandates depending on different provincial jurisdictions, very much like you'll see in the U.S. with different cities and different states having their own details. In terms of what remains, I live here in Ontario, and Premier Doug Ford, again, sort of our governor, promised that he would remove this vaccine passport system, which involves a QR code, by the way.
Unbelievable.
At the beginning of next month. So somewhere, I think it would be in March, if I recall correctly. We saw Jason Kenney, Premier in Alberta, also signal that he would do some sort of rescinding. But a lot of this, again, as I call it, the COVID-19 enterprise remains in play at the federal level and at provincial and municipal levels.
Wow.
We're talking with Robert Kraychik from Breitbart News about Canada. We have about, 4 minutes or so left in our conversation. I understand that there was some political maneuvering on Justin Trudeau's part in order to get the Emergency Powers Act extended. I understand that he threatened to resign if he didn't get the votes. Is that true, and what does that mean?
That I've not seen. So I'm not sure that that's accurate. I might have overlooked that, but I don't think he threatened to resign in that case. The political maneuvering has been going on forever. I mean, that's just the nature of politics. Clearly, his party is loyal, and there is an ostensibly oppositional party which challenges him from the left, the so-called National Democratic Party. And even though they've been critiquing Trudeau, again, from the left, saying he's not being aggressive enough, law enforcement is being too acquiescent, they stated that they were grudgingly supporting this invocation of the Emergencies Act to allow for greater power to put down this protest.
So where do you see things going from here? One of the things that boggles my mind personally when looking at what's taking place in Australia or Austria or any other place in Europe, I mean, now in Canada, you have what seems to be a large amount of your population in total discord with its representative government. I mean, shouldn't governments represent the will of the people? What happens from here?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, so I have judgment no better than you folks, but I'll share with you what I think will happen, or at least what I see happening now. I think one of the biggest stories of our time in terms of politics, sociology, is this growing conflict between an increasingly cynical and skeptical populace with an increasingly aggressive and oppressive government. And I think this is true across the English-speaking world. And I think we're reaching a sort of crescendo as governments become increasingly abusive and extractive and deceptive and immoral. Populations become increasingly aware of what's happening because it's hard to ignore. It's hard not to see when they're coming down your throat. And as the population becomes more recalcitrant, less compliant, at least voluntarily, the government and its allied apparatuses like media and technology firms become increasingly aggressive. So it's sort of this combination of mutually reinforcing forces that are colliding with one another. So I'm optimistic. I'm inspired. I saw amazing things in Ottawa. I saw people helping each other. I saw Ottawans doing laundry for truckers and inviting them to stay with their homes. I saw people making food for each other. I saw prayer sessions. How can I not be inspired?
Yeah.
So I would just urge, like-minded people, do not be demoralized, do not be discouraged, and remain active and stay the course.
I have to tell you, in America, in 2020, when we had occupying activities, it was like the other side of the spectrum. There were molestations and crime and drugs and violence. I mean, Occupy Portland and other places. Compared to Canada, where they're like feeding the homeless and
cleaning the city,
bouncy houses and tailgate parties. It's like, you Canadians, boy, you really know how to protest in a very safe and good way. So praise be to God for that. But Robert Kraychik, thank you for your time today. Breitbart News, we're very grateful for your being on our program, helping us sort things out from the Canadian trucker protest. We're very grateful for your time, sir.
Cheers, gentlemen. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. Praise be to God. That is going to do it for the first hour of Catholic Drive Time. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate having you on our team.